to you. He grew up in Georgia, and like a lot of us, he learned to shoe so that he could shoe his own horses. He continued to shoe for 5 years, including an apprenticeship. He then quit shoeing and became a barefoot evangelist. Since then, he has changed his outlook, and he believes that there's always a better way to do things, and keeping an open mind is the best way. He offers barefoot trims, boots, and glue-on shoes in his business. He enjoys the tough cases, focusing on laminitic and navicular horses. He's been around the world, educating a multitude of people. He is a family man. You've heard about him, you've read about him, now you can tell your friends about him. He's Pete Ramey.
I do owe each and every one of you an apology. I went through a barefooter evangelistic period 20 years ago, which would be not a big deal except that I wrote a book. And I can tell you right now, if you ever write something, you'd be ready to stand by it for the rest of your life, or at least deal with it. But if I'd written it 5 years sooner, it would have been all about the benefits of shoeing. And if I'd written it, actually it didn't come out until 4 years after I wrote it. And by then I was already cringing at some of the anti-shoeing kind of stuff. What I'd figured out by then is, and I believe in what I do, don't get me wrong, but what I figured out is that every method anybody's ever come up with, it works somewhere. For some horse, that's the perfect thing to do. And also every method everybody ever comes up with fails some horse. And the horses taught me that. And so what I think now is that for the horse's sake, and that we all just need to put our minds together, and you know, when I come to something like this, I'm sitting through every lecture, and I'm hoping I learn something that I can take home and help a horse with. And I always have the attitude myself that, well, if I learn your way and I know my way, then I'll be smarter than both of us. So that's how I hope that you can look at me here. And so anyway, one more thing I want to say is I'm trying to cram a lot of stuff into a very short space here. So I want to hold any questions or discussions until the end. And then once I get done getting through this, I'll talk to you as long as you want to. But let me just get through this first. What I want to talk to you today is about the vertical aspect of dealing with laminitis cases. And I'm going to talk a lot about reading the foot. And I want you to understand that I'm not trying to get around using radiographs. In fact, my most common use of my ability to read the foot is to justify getting radiographs to the client. But we also have a truth that outside of that clinical environment where you're getting radiographs before every trim or shoeing and after it, and then afterwards too, we would all love to have that. The truth of it is very few of us do. That even if we have radiographs, if they're 3 months old, they're not going to do us any good except for maybe evaluation of bone remodeling and stuff like that, or decisions that we're making out there. If that radiograph is not brand new fresh, it's going to be very minimal. So I want to talk a lot about the term CE. And that's how we track a sinker. It's the vertical relationship of the coffin bone to the hairline. And in this slide, this horse doesn't have a marker, and you can, if you have a good digital radiograph, you can estimate CE. But the only way to really measure it in a treatable, trackable way is if you have a radiopaque marker on the dorsal wall that stops precisely at the base of the hair follicles. And so after this, all the other radiographs that I'll show you are going to be marked that way. But this one you can just look at the hoof, look at the shape of it. Well, if it was darker in here, you'll be able to look at the shape of the hoof and see where that coronet is. And so the C is the coronet, of course. The E is the extensor process, which is the top of the coffin bone where the extensor tendon attaches. And these horses with deep CEs, and we're kind of programmed to call them sinkers, but to me, calling it a sinker is backwards. That the bone is there, and what is more accurate is things that the coronet is moved proximally up the limb. The coronet is displaced. But these are Farrier traps. And I'm like anyone else. I walk up to this foot and see this long toe, this long heel, and I'm sharpening my tools. I'm about to throw a lot of foot on the ground, I think. But then you'll notice, if you can see, this horse has a very thin sole. The reason the hoof capsule looks so long at the toe is because you have that deep CE, and you've got basically all of P2 buried in the hoof capsule. And so on a horse like this, you can choose. You can have a nice short hoof, and this one would have bone exposed, or you can have a nice thick sole and you're going to have a long hoof capsule. So really recognizing this is critical. This is the most extreme case that I can find. But I'll show you as I get through this. This occurs much more subtly in our everyday work that we see. And so look at this bottom hoof here. I haven't figured out how to run this thing yet. That you look at that heel, and at first glance, it's going to look to you, it does to me, like I need to cut a lot of heel off this horse. But there's just maybe the tiniest little bit. If you look at that normal distance from the outdoors or from the shoe to the bone, there's maybe the tiniest little bit that you could take off of here without thinning something that is already too thin when you walked up. And everything from in front of that red line forward is too thin, and therefore should be built, or at least definitely not trimmed there. So learn how to spot these in the field. So another typical case can you see the red dots that I put on there on this thing, or did that just get lost? Can you see the red dots? All right. I put a red dot at the hairline, at the heel and toe. I put another red dot at the apex of the front, another red dot at the heels, and that heel height we'll talk about collateral groove depth later, but it's sitting about 3/4 of an inch higher than that collateral groove there. And I put a dot on the sole at the end. And if you watch, and this was 6 months, and this is what, in the second set thing, I'm going to talk about how to do this, about how to improve that CE. You see where the only dot that's moving is the one on the sole, and that's because that sole got thicker, and so that dot moves. But I lined these up the best I could and see, what I accomplished there in 6 months, and there was you can see the lamellar wedge in front of the toe between the sole and the hoof wall. We'll talk a lot about that. That this was so you could tell walking up. This is also pretty significant hoof capsule rotation as well. Just seeing that lamellar wedge, which of course when the dermal and epidermal lamina separate, then they'll pile in keratin cells in between, and that lamellar wedge can be very hard material. It can be air. It can be doughy stuff, stretch bits of lamina, but either way we call it lamellar wedge. And so you see, we're growing this out in the process. Here's a radiograph on that same horse. Again, basically all of P2 buried in this hoof capsule, and then in the rotation, but just go back and forth. And that was that same 6-month period. So I'm going to talk about preserving the sole on a lot of these horses, because the trick to reversing a deep CE or improving a sinker, one of the number one things you're going to have to do is build a thick sole. It's that building of sole that is one of the main drivers of improving that. But most people, or a lot of people, are going to come up with this foot, and because it's so long, you'll start taking a lot of sole off the horse. And it's like, you know, I can see the mindset, you know, if I don't, I'll have this long hoof capsule. But I think of length from the bone instead of from the hairline. It's a much more reliable, repeatable way to get the same mechanics. Then you can see if you go through the time that if you thin this thing until it was bleeding and then put a shoe on it, that you probably end up still longer than this one with a nice thick sole and the shoe applied from a standpoint of the hairline. Another term that I'm not quite ready to talk about, but it'd be bad for me not to mention, I put this CC in the question marks. That's the collateral cartilage to the coronet measurement. I have no idea, I haven't tried to track this, if you could even measure accurately from the collateral cartilages or not. So that's why the question mark there. But still, this is going to be another indicator. You walk up to a long-heeled horse and you're wondering if the coronet is migrated up too high on the lateral cartilages. Another indicator is in the more normal one, your lateral cartilages come up above the hoof capsule. And that's what gives the look above the hairline, that rounded look above the hoof. That the more that sinks down through the hoof capsule, will start to come up from the coronet and just go straight over. So again, not anything I can even attempt to put a measurement to, but just somewhere that I can glance at a distance and know I have a lot of lateral cartilage sticking above the hairline or not. Now, what I think is probably natural as far as CE goes is somewhere very, very near zero. These lines I drew diagonally because we're supposed to measure this parallel with the ground, so it's trying to be parallel with the ground. But our best I can tell, our foals were born with a very close to a 0 CE. And then there's a lot about domestication. I think it's our traditions of not routinely trimming young horses. And the walls overgrow, taking away our support of sole, bars, and frog underneath. So the horse is hanging from the lamina. And then also there's a lot about the nutrition, high carbohydrate diet, inadequate nutrition that weakens the lamina, that also contributes to this. But for all that put together, it's pretty rare in domestication to find CE near zero. And I've got wild cadavers at home. I've got one domestic horse that I owned that was at home that have 0 or even negative CEs, that the bone is up higher than the coffin bone in the hoof capsule. But usually out here in the dirt, in the real world, I'm real happy if I've got a 5mm CE. I consider that probably pathological, but these horses get along great. Now, when we talk about reversing CE, a lot of people are like, or reversing a sinker or improving the CE. A lot of people may think it's not possible, but if you peel all the skin off of the hoof and can appreciate how flexible that the coronet is, and that there's a lot of movement, I think, that's going on naturally all the time. Dr. Reimer's slides showed that, yesterday, the coffin bone bouncing around inside the hoof capsule whenever the horse is in motion. And this represents, I want to set up a limitation that I had noticed 15, or I don't remember when I started thinking of 15 to 18mm CE as irreversible or a point of no return. And some of them you can reverse, but you'll be on a 5-year plan. if you get more than about 15 millimeters, that's 3/8 of an inch to 18 millimeters, 5/8 of an inch, sorry, to 18 millimeters, which is 3/4 of an inch. Those will often reverse very quickly, very easily. I'm going to show you several through here that, 4 months we can really make a big change to CE. But if it's more than 15 millimeters, this is going to be not as pretty. Okay, it's going to be more difficult. You'll be more likely to see abscessing along the way, so you don't want to be very aggressive with trying to reverse one of those. Like I say, put yourself on the 5-year plan. And so I had noticed that, and then when we started traveling to Auburn Vet School to work with Dr. Taylor, she had been taking a lot of venograms, and she had noticed that about 15 millimeters, if there was less thinking than that there'd be normal circulation through the coronet. That at about 15 millimeters, there was a big change, that now you would start to have massive disruption of circulation through the coronet. And so I was taking what I'd seen out in the dirt to what she was seeing on venograms, and it all fit together. What in the world have I done? Okay, and that's what I think is happening. I think that up to about 15 millimeters, we're just bouncing around in the horse's kind of normal range of motion, or at least that a horse can sink, and all you do is distort the coronet, but you haven't really done a bunch of real damage. And when you get past about 15 millimeters, now you're ripping and tearing stuff. And now you're causing, either permanent damage or damage that might heal, but is going to take a long time. So for estimating this stuff, my number one biggest advice to you is do as many dissections as you can. I have no idea, way over 100 dissections now, and I still learn something or gain a new insight every single time I cut a hoof open. And it's just, if you're a hoof professional, I just don't ever let anybody bury a hoof. And bonus points if it's a horse you've been working on, and that you've been watching how that horse responded, good or bad, to whatever you're doing. But you're familiar with that horse and you know the history. Those are the really most important ones for a professional to dissect. But you look at this hoof, and this is another one that I would walk up to at first glance and assume that I'm going to need to cut heel off this horse, or I suspect before I pick the foot up the ground. But then when you peel the hoof capsule off, you find that this is just a decent, good amount of sole here, and I like to see a 1/2 inch of sole thickness at minimum. I really like it better when I get on up into the 5/8 of an inch range of sole thickness, and I feel that way whether I'm protecting the foot from the ground or from a boot or from a shoe. That I think that horses have a real fundamental need for this, and it's important. And so that's what I put the quote from the great poet Aaron Tippin there: "You've got to stand for something, or you'll fall for anything." That I may want or need or think that I want to do this or that to a foot, but if it involves taking a 1/2 inch sole and turning it into a 1/4 of an inch thick sole, I'm out. I've got to think of another way. That really drives a lot of my work. And it's not just the sole. It's the frog skin, the bar material, the sole, the hoof wall. But basically, if I walk up to a horse and he has that 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch or more of any of those 4 tissues, then when I leave, he's going to still have at least that 1/2 inch, pretty much regardless of what else I may want for it. And if I come up to a horse that has less than that thickness of one of those, I'm going to protect, because I think that's such an important basic foundation for what the corium needs inside is just that armor. Okay? So that means I walk up to a foot and I've got to be able to visualize where the internal structure is. The first step to doing that is understanding what it's shaped like. You know, not only the coffin bone, but of huge importance, the lateral cartilages. That we understand what they're shaped like. And the lateral cartilages, I see them as a foundation for the foot, just like the coffin bone. You know, we've got lamina attached to them, we've got solar corium attached to them, we've got bar lamina, you know, where the bars are growing from them. And so this one's a donkey. The reason I used it is just because really it's just the best one that I have. It's really hard to dissect out the lateral cartilages because the dermal lamina, the solar corium, the bar lamina are so tough and so well connected to it and I really like to see more of Dr. Ramey talked about this. This was Dr. Taylor's study of taking an MRI and CT scan combined in a computer program. Then you could not only measure the volume and density of these structures and see an image of them on a computer screen, but actually these are just 3D prints of that information. And to see appreciate what the lateral cartilages are shaped like, as I'm starting to look underneath, this is a thoroughbred foot. You see that now the blue, the digital cushion peeking out at you from underneath. I also see, I'll talk later about bone remodeling, that this one had lost a lot of bone around the outer periphery, and then that ski tipping added on to the front of the bone. You see it there, it's going to be, you know, a very flat bone that we'll talk about later because of loss of mass in the bone. There's the package from the bottom, the coffin bone, the navicular bone, the digital cushion, the lateral cartilages. Now the next layer out is really what we're concerned with. That's what we want to armor, and that's the corium. So if you visualize just pulling a big red winter sock over all this underlying structure, and it's an 1/8 of an inch to up to 1/4 to maybe sometimes 5/16 of an inch or so of blood, nerves, and connective tissue that are covering this internal structure. All one thing, we call it the corium. And if you look, you can, wait, I'm going the wrong way. If you see that little bump right there, that's where the coffin bone's ending. If you get one of these in your hand, you can feel where it stops being bone and then starts coming back onto the lateral cartilages, and then of course the digital cushion in the center. And so it's made up of its parts: the solar corium, the bar lamina right there, the frog corium, the coronary papilla, the dermal lamina, and the terminal papilla. All these parts together, we collectively call it corium. When I start talking about estimating sole thickness, you have to think about that different coffin bones come in different depths or amounts of concavity. Some of this are breed differences. I believe that it varies a lot depending on the terrain that the horse is raised on, and of course, whether it was getting routine hoof care when it was young. I believe that makes a difference. Then also, of course, sometimes you'll lose, like we talked about on that 3D print, that you'll lose bone around the outer periphery. The way you can tell if you just got a lateral radiograph is look at there's two lines that you need to appreciate whenever you look at a lateral radiograph. The red is the sagittal plane. It usually shows up a lot better in the radiograph, and that's basically you're looking at a cross section. If you split that hoof right down the middle, it's what you'd be looking at, little pointy things sticking down the hoof capsule. And then the blue that I drew there, I'm a horse guy, not a computer guy. The blue there, that's your outer periphery that you can see on a lateral radiograph. If those two come out all the way to a point, you probably have little or no remodeling or bone loss of the coffin bone. And also, of course, by the angle there, you can see how much depth or concavity that coffin bone has. And then if you see that red line, if you got the blue line right here and that red line merges into it back from the tip, you're going to have bone loss around the outer periphery. And you're going to have a flat coffin bone because you've lost bone from there. So nice little trick right there. So I take all this information that I've told you about and that I'm going to tell you about, radiographs if I have them, and I walk up to every foot and I'm trying to visualize these internal structures. Now, again, I already said, I think this is in everyday life on normal horses, but I'm here to talk to you about these sinkers and hoof capsule rotation. And for my work and the way I do things, the lamina are generally no big deal. Okay? Well, if I'm going to fall on my face, if I'm going to have trouble, it's going to be with the solar corium. And this is, to me, the crux of any laminitis case. That everybody wants to talk about the lamina, but me trying to figure out better and better ways to deal with the solar corium is what keeps me up at night. And so number one, again, what we need is to be sure we're needing enough armor. But another challenge is the solar corium really doesn't mind pressure. In fact, I believe now, there are people that will tell you that the hoof wall is supposed to bear all of the weight, that all of the weight is supposed to be hanging from the lamina. I do not agree. There are also people that will tell you that the sole and the bars and the frogs are supposed to be bearing all the weight, and the hoof wall is just an armor plating, that it has no load-bearing role. I disagree with that too. What I believe is that all of it's supposed to be working together as a team. But what a lot of people that think that the solar corium can't handle pressure, what they've observed is pressure without release. There are very, very different mechanics behind, if you shoe with sole pressure. We're not just picking on you. You can set up in a glue-on, you can set up in a hoof boot, pressure that doesn't release. You may get the way the horse bear down, it may be less, but if you've got pressure, you need to put this thinking into every shoeing package and anything else that you do. Again, I feel this way for a healthy horse, but we can get away with more on a healthy horse. I think it'd be better if we were thinking about this in every package. But I promise you, because laminitis is my area of experience, that if you try to put pressure to a sole that doesn't 100% release whenever the hoof is in flight or unloaded, you're going to have troubles. That your secret, any way that you can come up with to allow support for these horses. Because when the lamina fail, and again, the lamina are supposed to be helping support the horse, but when the lamina fail, now we put all of our pressure on the sole, bars, frog, and that's unnatural. And then when you do the trimming I'm going to talk about doing and shoeing and booting methods to grow out a hoof capsule rotation or to reverse a sinker, that now what I'm going to tell you puts even more pressure on the solar corium. So we have to build that into every package that we do. Now I'm going to talk about a lot of different sole building tactics in this presentation and the next one. But the number one thing is being sure that you're not cutting sole from a thin-soled horse. Now that seems obvious, who would do that? But I see it every day. And if you consider me the dark side, and I know some of you do, it's okay. If you consider me the dark side, it's sole trimming that brings me a lot of horses. That was the problem. So it seems obvious that no one. Now you also can't say don't trim the sole, because soles sometimes overgrow, and if you don't thin them down to a normal thickness, it'll cause troubles too. But to say, why would somebody trim soles from a thin-soled horse? There's a lot of reasons for it. Number one, I already talked about when the CE is too long. That's the biggie. That's what leads, because almost nobody will do excessive sole trimming if you've got a 5mm CE. None of you. Because you can trim the horse or shoe the horse, not cut all that sole off, and it yields a nice short hoof capsule everybody's happy with. But like, this is the same horse from my opening slide. That you saw the radiographs, we've got maybe an 1/8 of an inch thick sole at the toe. And so that kind of foot is going to lead a lot of people into taking too much sole. Excuse me. I usually turn the mic off and have to cough, but I don't know how. I can't reach this one. So I'm just talking right now about taking the whole sole. A lot of people do it in the name of exfoliation. Now, normal removal of exfoliating material is a good thing. I like to leave a 1/4 of an inch thick layer of exfoliating material on top of the true sole plane. I think horses go better. I think they're better protected, and I've never seen a 1/4 of an inch of exfoliating material cause any problems. So, but what you've got to watch is on a horse that's a slow sole growth. And you can spot these in the radiograph near 100%, that if it has bone remodeling and bone loss around the outer periphery and or a ski tip, you can almost count on the horse having a hard time building sole. But on these horses, if he's got a 1/4 of an inch of sole and he has a 1/2 an inch of exfoliating crud, I find that it's better to leave some of the exfoliating crud. That it's just, if it's automatic, that you're just taking off all the exfoliating layers without thinking about how thick the true sole is, I think you'll be messing up on some horses. A lot of people do it in the name of trimming down to clean white line. I like clean, tight white lines as much as anyone, but if the lamina has failed, that's when you need a thick sole. That's when you've got extra problems. So I'll use cleaning out, packing, antimicrobial soaking tactics, all that by a horse owner. A lot of and nutritional stuff I'll talk about later. The last thing I'm going to do is go cutty into sole, trying to find a place that there's clean white line. And a lot of people do it in the name of relieving sole pressure. This makes some sense perhaps on a shoe. That a lot of people carve right around the outer periphery to thin the sole. to relieve the sole pressure. It may make sense on a shoe, but you got to watch it out in the dirt, rock, stuff like that. That I think it gets in people's heads sometimes on a barefoot horse that you can leave a 1/16 of an inch of relief to the sole or corium. To the sole, and then that horse runs around on rocks that big around, and what you've done is take away armor without really relieving any pressure whatsoever. Just something to think about. I see a lot of people thinning soles this way, leaving adequate sole at the toe, and taking it too much at the back. Same thing, same reasons. A lot of people do that chasing distorted heel tubules with flared bars. And the same thing if you're having CE problems, that just, not realizing that part, being back to this, the same horse I showed you that has just the right amount of material between the coffin bone and the lateral cartilages in the outdoors, that if you didn't notice that or know it, you would come along and end up trimming the foot like this. And then also in the name of bringing weight bearing back. The most common was probably this, that people were taking too much sole at the toe. I loved it in the last presentation, warning about that, because that's a huge problem, I think. And I'll see it. A lot of people that wouldn't do it on a normal horse, if that wall flares, if you have a hoof capsule rotation or a big toe flare, then now it looks like a duck standing there. that leads a lot of people into cutting material vertically from underneath, you know, until there's a dot of blood, until you can move the sole around with your fingers. Now, I don't have time to talk about breakover, and you all are breakover experts anyway. That foot can be brought back, you know, but that real estate underneath is usually just solid gold stuff, and that's the most common time I see that. Now here's the thing. All these things that trick people into thinning already thin soles are important things to me too. I like short toes. I like short heels. I like my weight bearing back. I like strong straight bars. You know, every one of these things are things that I want for the horse, and I want to get there eventually. But this is where the Aaron Tippin quote comes in, though. I may want short heels, but if that CE is deep, they're, you know, from a hairline standpoint, it's not going to happen today. And this stuff, even if you know it, you're going to have to teach it to your horse owners. You'll get judged, you know, poorly if you leave that foot looking long, and you may have set your shoe up or your trim exactly right around the coffin bone, but if the horse owner's not recognizing it, they're going to think you left the foot too long. You're going to have to explain it. You're going to have to show them. Best thing to do then is get that lateral radiograph, and that way you can show them. So for all that, in order to be sure that I was leaving all that armor underneath, would require a radiograph at every trim in the front of the foot. It would require an MRI in the back of the foot at every trim. If not for this phenomenon right here, and that's the collateral grooves. It's the seam between the frog and the sole. The very bottom of that groove, the collateral grooves, or collateral sulci, the groove between the sole and the frog, and it originates from a point between the frog corium and the solar corium, and then when you get towards the back of the foot, between the bar lamina and the frog corium. That groove, whether the foot is too long or too short, has a very strong tendency to be about 8 or 9 millimeters off the ground. We'll talk about some exceptions, but almost all the time, and that's from front to back. This one cut about 1 inch behind the apex of the frog, but anywhere you slice that, you'll find the same general distance. That's 3/8 of an inch, and so you can use that to estimate how much sole is in the outer periphery. Now, we're not talking about the hoof wall. You can see how much hoof wall is or is not standing past the sole, but this is just for reading the sole thickness right at the outer periphery, all the way around from bar to bar. You can do this. And the way this goes is if it's like the left of that photo, where that horse would be bleeding, or almost bleeding, there's no sole on the left side of the photo, then we're going to have an 1/8 of an inch, or we're going to have a very shallow collateral groove depth. If you have adequate sole on the outer periphery, like the right side of the photo, left side of the photo, then that's going to lift the collateral grooves higher off the ground. Now, unfortunately, you can't put a measurement to this because, as I already said, how high that's going to be varies with the shape of that coffin bone. And so, but it is better than nothing. And if you don't have radiographs at every trim, it's good to understand this. And so, I measure like this, measure down to the bottom of the collateral groove. That one's 15 millimeters or 5/8 of an inch. It's a very common measurement. If you've got a good bone and you've got good sole thickness around the outer periphery, very commonly in the front, it'll be that collateral groove will be a 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch off the ground. Hind feet, the coffin bone tends to be a bit deeper, so you can probably add 1/8 of an inch or so to your hind foot on a horse that's going to have the same sole thickness around the outer periphery. In the back, I measure these at the deepest point, and I compare that to the heel height. That deepest point is usually right about mid-bar back there, that it swoops down a little bit deeper. And so since that collateral groove is paralleling the internal structures, from front to back, then we can use this in a lot of ways. A horse that has a 5-degree palmar angle will have a very strong tendency to have a collateral groove that's a 1/2 inch deeper at the back than it is at the front. If you find your collateral groove's depth are the same front and back, you're going to be very close to a 0 palmar or plantar angle. If you find that it's shallower in the back than it is in the front, it's going to be negative. Okay? And then I also use the collateral grooves as one of my balancing techniques, to a point to say a lateral, a 0-degree DP radiograph, and you're looking at the balance of how much sole the wall is on each side. If you come back an inch behind the apex, or like in line with the widest part of the foot actually, and balance both sides off the ground, you're going to get that good 0 DP radiograph. And then I use it too, like this one was a bit of a shear heel case, with one lateral cartilage pushed up higher than the other. If I'm wanting to balance the same amount of tissue covering both lateral cartilages, it'll have the effect of floating that heel with the higher lateral cartilage, and leaving and hoping that it can come down to normal. Okay, but if you're going to use these in your work, you have to be aware. 97% of the time these are accurate, but there are exceptions. Collateral grooves can be eaten deep by fungus. So if you find any sensitivity down in there, if you find that distinct fungal infection smell, if you drag out white or gray cottage cheese type material out of there with a hoof pick, be suspicious of the information that you're getting from the collateral grooves. If you've had an abscess underneath it, usually the most common is when there's been a subsolar abscess of both the frog corium and the solar corium. The whole deal will just pop loose like a giant blood blister. Now, hopefully underneath, you got new solar, you got new frog growing, and hopefully a new collateral groove. But for a while, you'll have a false reading because you're measuring to a fake one. And another that comes up, not so much for me in the east, but comes up a lot in the desert, is the information may be accurate, but it'll get dry and tight back there. You got a fat frog, and the information is accurate, but you can't measure it. That you think you're measuring the height of the heels, but you could always just cram your pick on in there a little bit more. I'm not recommending that, but that's a common one too. And again, the other 90-something% of the time, these are accurate, but you just can't use them without being very conscious of these exceptions. So we walk up to a flat-footed horse, and this is a good indicator. And this thing, can't see it as well as I thought you'd be able to. That's all of my hoof pit. There's none hidden down in there, but that's got a less than 1/8 of an inch collateral groove height off the ground. And I know that I've either got a thin sole at the outer periphery or bone remodeling or both. I may not know which one, but I have to get a radiograph for that a lot of times, but I know I've got trouble. But that brings up the most. It's very common for people to try to create a concavity in the foot by cutting material out of the middle. You got to watch that on these because what's going on is this: that sole's thin, the collateral grooves are accurate. A lot of people want to come and try to cut concavity in the foot by taking material out of the middle. When you do that, you're cutting an area that's already too thin. If you're cutting an area that's already too thin, you'll never thicken it. So instead, when you want to build concavity, it's like this, okay? And that you want to grow out concavity by adding mass around the outer periphery. And contrary to the way I have to draw this, the foot is almost never getting longer as you do that. What's happening is it's pushing the bones up in the hoof capsule. I already said that's not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is the core that's relaxing down. And that's why I'm spending so much time talking about sole thickness in the talk that's supposed to be about CE, about sinkers, is that it's building that adequate sole that is the primary driving force that's going to help you reverse the CE. You have to watch them too when they get halfway grown out, like the red there, that you're going to have concavity flowing out from the frog, and then it goes flat at the outer periphery. And a lot of people tend to want to now walk up to that foot if they don't recognize what's going on and concave, cut that little corner off and concave the foot that way. Again, you're thinning a sole that's already too thin. Okay, so what you want to do instead is look at it that I want to build that missing triangle of sole around the outer periphery. These will look like this. You got the concavity flowing up from the apex of the frog. And then it goes pancake flat at the outer periphery. That's showing you an area of missing sole, probably. Now, you also may have a perfectly adequate sole thickness, but your bone is flat because it's remodeled around the outer periphery. And again, I can't tell but it's kind of, you can get a radiograph and find out. But just one lateral shot will tell you. But I usually just leave the sole on there anyway, because if there's bone remodeling like that, the horse is going to be a slow sole growth. And it's almost never appropriate, in my opinion, to cut that outer periphery if you have a slow sole growth. So it's kind of like I see that. A lot of times I really don't know which is occurring, or very commonly a little bit of both. But I'm not going to trim that sole at the outer periphery. I'm going to leave it like that. When I'm trimming the hoof wall, I'm going to stop short of it, rather than cutting to the sole, then cutting some sole to make it short of the wall. Be very careful with my trimming to stop short of that. Okay, another thing, now that's all about the sole of the outer periphery. I want to talk about this sole in the middle of the foot. And specifically about your collateral grooves that run from in front of the bar, along the side of the frog, around the apex of the frog, and back to the other bar. It's important to leave 1/4 of an inch straight vertical drop down, and that's just because if you do it like the nose side and concave the foot all the way to the outer periphery, all the way down to the level of the collateral grooves, you just cut your sole to 3/8 of an inch thick, which is, that's almost half what you need. Okay? So instead, like a lot of times looking at the left side of the photo, they'll build up this big ridge along the side of the frog. And a lot of times it might be appropriate to take that off. But always float your knife 1/4 of an inch above that collateral groove to keep from cutting your sole down to that 3/8 of an inch thickness. But another thing important on the right side, it's a really bad design in my opinion. The way a thin sole gets thicker, the better way, I wish that it was, is that the horse just added a layer of keratin across the whole bottom of the sole, and the whole thing just keeps getting thicker, thicker, thicker. It never happens that way. What the horse does is it will prioritize sole growth in the area that needs it the most. Once it reaches adequate sole thickness there, then it'll move and start producing sole in another spot. Terrible design, but it's the way they do it. So if you don't recognize that and you're cutting the lump and bump off, in a commonplace, one of the most common ways that a horse builds sole onto a thin sole horse is they'll throw that ridge of sole around the bar. I'll show you a picture of it later. And if it's like the left side and it's a 1/2 inch tall, relative to collateral grooves, it might be appropriate to cut that off, but float your knife above that collateral groove. If it's like this one, if you see a ridge around the frog and you measure that height, then all it's done is built adequate sole thickness right in that one spot. So leave it alone. And then it'll spread, your sole thickness will get wider and wider out to the outer periphery. But if you cut that off every 4 weeks, you'll never achieve adequate sole thickness. Ask me how I know that one. So a lot of these will look like this. The kind of a common trend for me that I am cutting sole around that, around the apex of the frog, but doing two things. One, I'm intentionally leaving a 1/4 of an inch thick layer of exfoliating sole, just because I like to, but also leaving that 1/4 of an inch straight drop off, that I'm not carving that all the way out to the bottom of the collateral grooves. I'm leaving it alone at the outer periphery, and then letting it build. And that's how you build good solar concavity on the foot. It's all about that outer periphery. That it's and I'll do it if it's too thick, but it's pretty rare for me to trim any in that outer periphery. Just let it build. When I do it, it's usually on the hind foot that's going negative. I say 8 out of 10 times that I cut sole off of the toe of a horse or off that outer periphery, it's on a negative palmar plantar angle. So real quick, I'm almost out of time here, but I want to hit what people are calling retracted soles very quickly, because it really underscores this ability to read the sole in the middle of the foot. That if you look at that lower left photo, and this one not only is concave all the way out to the collateral groove, that collateral groove depth relative to the sole is 0, but it actually dips down even deeper. So right there along the apex of the frog, I can know, or at least strongly suspect, that I've got a 3/8 of an inch sole thickness right there at the collateral groove, and then it gets thinner and thinner. And then it swoops, as it gets close to the outer periphery, it swoops up to adequate thickness right at the outer periphery. And that's common. A lot of these are like that. They have a thin sole, and then I think it's more accurate to call them a proud periphery, than the sole retracted somewhere. I mean, but a lot of times the entire sole will be a slow grower, but right at the terminal papilla, the horse will still crank out adequate sole thickness right there, and that's the stuff that would be making the sole half of our white line. And but then a lot of them too, I'll show you a picture in a minute, have lamellar wedge, and you can tell on a lateral rating. I'll show you that in a minute. This one, but I want to point out this horse and the same horse, however many months later that was, they both have a 1/2 inch deep collateral groove, height off the ground at the apex of the frog. But a tremendously more sound situation later, because I let that 1/4 of an inch straight drop off build, and then build adequate sole with the outer periphery. The first step to that, this is the same foot in between somewhere. You see how it grew that ridge of sole first around the outer periphery. I left it alone, and then afterwards it didn't get any taller. Once it reached adequate thickness, it started growing more sole everywhere else. And then this is a shot of one that will be lamellar wedge, that you can see, hopefully see that true sole. What's sole on this one and what's lamellar wedge. And this is an extra clear one. You can often see it. In fact, if you know, using your regular hoof mapping methods and stuff like that there's toe flare or hoof capsule rotation on a horse, or just a big flare, and you can't see that line, this is sole, this is lamellar wedge, that's highly indicative of bone remodeling as well. The more bone remodeling a coffin bone does, the more the sole and the lamellar wedge kind of blend together, and you stop being able to see that seam. So a lot of our retracted sole cases people are talking about, what I believe is happening is the sole was thin year round, and then you came into a wet time, into an abrasive period, and that allowed that outer periphery of sole and or lamellar wedge around the outer periphery to build up taller, and it gives the illusion that the sole went somewhere. This is what I think. And here's the radiograph there. You can see it on a lateral radiograph that this horse, by just projecting where that tissue grew from, you know, now yes, you can have a little bit of sole distortion there, but pretty much if you project straight down from the coffin bone, you're going to be looking at your location of the sole. Anything between that line and the hoof wall is going to be a lamellar wedge type area. So another way you can spot these there. So now back to this full circle to the beginning, how do you tell? Usually horses that have adequate sole thickness will have a 1/2 of an inch, adequate sole thickness, the outer periphery will have a 1/2 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch of collateral groove height off the ground in the front. They'll tend to be an inch off the ground in the back if they have a 5, or I should say a 1/2 inch more than that in the back if they have adequate sole thickness and a 5-ish degree palmar angle. So you walk up to this long foot, you sharpen your tools because you're about to do a lot of work, and the collateral grooves will help you recognize, you pick up the foot, this horse had a 0 collateral groove depth at the apex of the frog. That helps me know that I've got a thin sole at the toe. It had a 3/4 of an inch collateral groove height off the ground at the back. That helps me know that there's not a lot of heel that I'm going to be trimming off here, unless I'm being tricked by a big false sole. And the only reliable way I know to find that out is to get a lateral radiograph and look. And so that should probably help you kind of see a picture. You know, so that's going to tell you got a long hoof capsule and a thin sole. You've got a deep CE. You might look at your upper growth at the top and your hoof mapping methods and tell that you've got rotation, and the collateral grooves on the bottom to tell you your heel height's about right at the back, but that you could build more sole at the toe, and that should be helping you form an image in your head that I'm wanting to do something like this. Reverse the CE, grow in a better connected hoof wall, leave the heels about right where they are, and then build an adequate sole underneath at the toe. Okay? And so that's what we're going to do in the second talk is I'm going to talk to you how I do that. So I'm done. Buy our book. My kids will thank you. That's my chance to make some money off this trip. And as long as my time, I blew my time. No, I didn't blow it. Whatever you want, I'll step down and talk to people. Lee, where'd you go? I'll step down and talk to people in private or take questions, whatever y'all want.
Well, first let's get a round of applause for Pete. That was good.